that you're here. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Duncan Banks. I'm the director of the Further Faster network. And this is number 4 in our How to Hub series that we're doing at the moment. And Matt's just going to drop into the chat. Matt's helping us do all the technical stuff today. He's going to drop into the chat where you can find all the other How to Hub conversations. Some of them have been, well, all of them have been fantastic. We started off with how do you use AI as leaders to grow your church, and that was brilliant from Dave Adamson. That was a game changer for so many leaders. We're just wanting to be really practical and really helpful to help you in your task of growing a church that people who don't normally go to church find incredibly attractive and want to keep coming back to. So that's our task in these how-to hubs. So Matt's just dropped in the chat where you can go and find all those other videos. So bookmark that and go back to it at another time. Today, we're talking about how we create high-performing teams. How do we create teams that get stuff done in our church, whether they're volunteer teams or whether they're paid staff teams? How do we get the best out of our teams so that they actually get stuff done? Somebody said to me, why are you asking Andy and Lane, who are our guests today, why are you asking them to talk about this particular subject? I'll tell you why, and I put it into the chat when you were in the waiting room. I'll do it again. I heard Andy a few years ago say this, and it's one of those things that you write down and you go, boom, it's blown my mind. He said, strategy is essential. And we know that as leaders, right? We know that how you get from where you are now to where you want to be takes some strategic thinking. You can't just put your sail up and hope the wind blows you there. You need to plan and strategize. And Andy's right, strategy is essential. But he says, if your team can't execute your strategy, then your strategy is just another Google Doc. And when I heard him say that, I thought, oh, I've been so many times, I've got all my best laid plans written down on a Google Doc, but no one's actually executing on them. So I just thought, if Andy is saying that, then we need to listen. So that's what prompted me to reach out to Lane and to Andy and say, could you help our lead pastors? Could you help the pastors in our country just to get better at creating teams that get stuff done, that perform well, that perform in a high manner. So what I'd love to do before we dive into the content, I'm going to ask you to dive into the chat because it would be really, really, really helpful. I want to ask you just to put the answer to this question in the chat. And here's the question, I've just dropped it there. What are the barriers church leaders face when trying to create a team that gets stuff done at church? That will really help Lane and Andy and help inform their conversation with us. What are the kind of barriers that you see as a church leader that you face when you're trying to create those kind of teams, whether they're paid teams or they're unpaid teams, whether they're volunteers or on staff? What are the barriers that you find in creating those teams that actually get stuff done, that are catalytic, that move the ball further down the field? So if you could drop some of those down, that would be incredibly helpful, and it would inform Lane and Andy's discussion. And the other thing to say is, I'm going to hand over to Lane in a minute and to Andy. The other thing to say is, as you go through this, if you're anything like me, you'll have a million questions. You'll want to say, oh, Andy, hang on a minute. Could you go a bit deeper into that? Or could you give me a bit of clarity on what you've just said there? You've got the opportunity to ask those questions. Drop them in the chat immediately, straight as you think about them, and we can pick them up at the end. Lane's going to hand back to me, and then I can ask Andy and Lane those questions on your behalf. So please keep dropping those questions in the chat. So a couple of really important things before we kick into this. First off, I want to personally invite you to our national conference on June the 24th and 25th in Hales Owen. And I'm really excited to say that Lane is going to be with us in person on stage at that national conference. Andy's been the last 2 times. And I don't know whether it's true, but I get the impression that Andy's going further afield. He's going to our sister network in Australia and helping them run a national conference there, which is really exciting. I'm very jealous because I love it down in Australia. So Lane's coming, and he's bringing Joel Thomas with him as well. So Lane, welcome to our conversation today. I wonder whether you take a minute before we dive into the content, just to talk a little bit about the June conference.
Yeah.
Tuesday and Wednesday. What can people expect?
Absolutely. First of all, let me just say hi to everyone. I was with a few of you a couple of weeks ago the lead pastor gathering. It was great to see you, to spend some time together, and to just connect on a personal level. I'm so excited about everything that's going on with the Further Faster Network, and to have seen it grow from the very beginning, from an idea to including all of you, has just been amazing. But yeah, as Duncan said, we're going to be over in June. I'm very excited about that, and I'm excited to see you guys. But I'm really excited for
Can
you to
that
meet
go
and
away?
get to spend some time with Joel Thomas. Joel is the current executive director of North Point Ministries. He's also the lead pastor at Buckhead Church. But the thing that excites me most for all of you, he was actually our first intern about 28 years ago. And so Joel has held just about every position anyone or any one of you has held as you've worked up through your career, as well as spending some time out in Arizona leading a church out there. And so he has amazing insight, not only about how we do what we do, but about how to make those principles transferable to another organization, and in some ways turn an organization that which is what a lot of us are in the process of doing. So can't be more excited than for you to meet Joel, hear from Joel. We'll spend a day with our Further Faster teams, and then we'll have a day for many of you who are interested in pursuing a relationship with the network to spend with you as well. So great time in Hales Owen. Then we're going to head over to Ireland. And so, yeah, Duncan, look forward to it, and just having a great time.
Oh, that'll be fantastic. And just to remind people, so it's 24th, 25th of June. It's a Tuesday and a Wednesday. Tuesday is for our partner churches only. Wednesday's open to everybody.
Right.
Matt has already dropped in the chat how you can register for that and how you can find more information. It's the perfect event to bring your elders, your trustees, your volunteers, your staff, to bring the whole team and learn together. So Tuesday and Wednesdays in Hales Owen near Birmingham. And then we jump. Oh, hello. How did that happen? Then we Tuesday, Wednesday. When you put two fingers like that, you get balloons. Yeah. And then on the Wednesday night, we're jumping on a plane, you and me, Lane, and Joel, and we're flying to Belfast. And we're doing the event
Yeah.
in Belfast as well with Gary Beatty and his church. So that'll be 3 days that'll worth putting in your diary, whichever's closest to you. Okay. One other piece of information that I'm going to throw over to Lane and to Andy. Actually, Andy, while you're there, can I ask you just a quick question? Our next how-to hub is with someone on your staff, Andy. It's with Holly Goddard on July the 1st. And
Yep.
she's talking about healthy teams. So you guys are talking about high-performing teams. Can you still have a hustle and remain healthy is what she's talking about. So it complements what you guys are doing really well. But introduce Holly to us, because a lot of our folks won't know Holly. What's up?
Yeah, well, first, we don't use the word hustle like that. So let's start there.
Okay, sorry.
Hustle is like a side job that's not legit in the United States. But anyway, that's okay. Yeah.
Do you know where I got
We,
that from, Andy? That I
from
got
Lane, probably.
no, I got it from Holly.
Oh, okay. Never mind. We do use it that way. People from my generation don't. So anyway, yeah. So just cut me off if this is too much. Years ago, when I moved back to North Point, I had two jobs, the whole organization in North Point Community Church. And I needed somebody that could serve as a chief of staff, like run the church, basically do what the lead pastor does other than preach and some of that stuff. And Holly had taken the four disciplines of execution book and had implemented it from top to bottom with our preschool ministry.
Wow.
And everybody read the book on the team here, but only Holly executed it. Like said, hey, why do we read this book if we're not going to do something with it? And she turned that ministry around and made it better. And I needed somebody who could execute a plan. So I reached, you say down in the organization, you know what I mean? I reached several levels into the organization and said, Holly, I need somebody that can execute a plan. I need you to run the staff and the North Point Community Church. And she agreed to do it. And she is a great, great leader. I could not do everything I do without Holly. And so she's phenomenal. So you'll learn a lot from her. She's a real deal. Her story. The other thing too, many of you listening probably know this. when you get to do what we do with people who consider themselves a product of what we do, their passion and their insight and their intolerance of anything less than what we do is appropriately fierce. And I'm surrounded by three women who would say our church is why they have a faith of their own and why they have faith at all. So they bring something to the organization that I don't, because I'm a church kid, always been a church kid. And Holly is one of those people. And when she shares her story about the first time she walked into North Point Community Church, it just inspires all of us, because we're like, that is what we're trying to do. And here you are in charge basically of this campus. So anyway.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Andy. I can't wait. July the 1st, 1:00. Holly's on with us talking about emotionally healthy leadership, really, which will be a great follow-on from what you guys are doing. I'm going to jump out of the way and leave you, Lane, to have a conversation with Andy about how we create those high-performing teams who get stuff done in our organizations. Over to you guys, and I'll come back. Keep the questions coming in the chat, because that'll be really helpful as we get towards the end. Thanks, Lane. Over to you.
Yep. Thank you, Duncan.
Great. Thanks, Dunk. Andy, great to see you. And again, many of you have met Andy. He's been over with you guys a couple of times last year and a couple of years before that. And so, as I said before, we couldn't be more excited than to spend a little bit of time with you, especially talking about this topic, because this is something that we talk about, around here quite a bit, and have done many times. So, Andy, as we get into this topic, I know one of the things you always like to differentiate between is building a high performance team and just hiring employees. So why don't you start there and just talk about how we look at those as two different things?
Yeah, and this is not a clean distinction, but an employee is somebody that you hire to do a job. You give them a job description, they stay in their lane, they do their job, right? You reward them accordingly. But the people on your core high performance team, these are people who are not just doing a job, they're taking on responsibility. It's the person who shares what you share as a lead pastor or somebody as an executive at your church, where you never actually switch it off. I mean, you go home and you focus on your family, but at any point the phone could ring and you are re-engaged, because you're not just doing a job, you are carrying responsibility. And the people that are going to be part of any high performance team are people who carry responsibility. They don't just have, a job description. And again, depending on the nature of what a person does, not everybody carries responsibility. Right. But the people on a high performance team, they are people who carry it and carry it well. So that's again, it's not necessarily a clean distinction, but you kind of get the idea, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Which, that kind of tees us up to the obvious question, how do we build that kind of high performing team? And again, we're going to get to that in a second, but I love the story about how this idea of, oh no, I need to develop people who carry responsibility, who are high performing, first dawned on you one Sunday morning.
Yeah. And this is, this is broader than high performing teams, but it does, I guess, serve as a launching point for the discussion. So one Sunday, it was a Sunday where I didn't have any responsibility. I just showed up, and I love to just show up and watch it work without me. That's what I say. In other words, I don't have any specific responsibility. I just pull up in the traffic, sit in a chair, enjoy the service, walk the halls. So I'm walking around just so grateful for all that God has done and grateful for these amazing volunteers. But it had grown to the point where it had become more complicated than before. And I don't, panic is probably too strong of a term, but I realized this is so complicated and it's working so well. And if it suddenly broke, I'm not sure I would know how to fix it, because I don't know why it works as well as it does. And I was smart enough to know this: you can't fix something when it breaks if you don't know why it's working to begin with. And so consequently, I realized, hey, back in the old days when we were a single site church and we were smaller, I understood all the moving parts. And suddenly it had outgrown, this is kind of strange to say, my understanding of why it worked as well as it did. And we are all, I haven't met you all, but I'm assuming because of what you do, you're all very good at fixing problems. If something breaks, I mean, you jump in and you diagnose the problem and you figure out how to fix it. So we're all good at jumping in to fix things when they break, but we're not all good at stopping to consider why does it work when it's working? And you can't fix it when it breaks if you don't know why it was working when it works. And then to make it worse, in church world, when things are going really well, we just resort to, well, God's just blessing. God is just, boy, God is really blessing. Well, the question is, what exactly is God blessing? Because if you don't know why it's working when it works, you can't fix it when it breaks. And I never use that. I mean, I'm very careful ever using that language, because what it really says is God is really blessing our church, but God, for some reason, isn't blessing the church down the street or the other 5 churches down the street. Right. And that's kind of an arrogant thing to say. So I think even as spiritual leaders, it's incumbent upon us to understand why it's working when it works so that we can adjust and fix it when it breaks. So that led me to asking some of the questions that then led to the content we're about to talk about today. So I think that's what you were getting at, Lane.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things you always point out to us and keep very present in front of us is it's not only can things break, things can drift. And if you really don't know, we're far more susceptible to drifting than we are to necessarily the thing just falling apart or breaking. So this actually helps with both of those things. It helps.
And I would add one more thing before we get to the specifics. The other thing I learned, I read this in Tom Peters' book, Thriving on Chaos, which is a giant book that no one ever finishes. I think that's where I read this. But and this is many years ago, he talked about the driving force of an organization, that oftentimes there's a thing that's the driver to an organization's success. And if you don't know what that is, you can accidentally underfund it, undermine it, and walk away from it. And you've walked away, from the driving force behind the organization. And so that was part of what, as I watched this thing work so well, I thought, what's the core, what's the driver that we need to fuel and that we dare not unfund or think, oh, well, we need to change that because we're just all tired of doing the same thing the same way. So that's another part of this. I didn't want to skip that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, I just thinking back, we're right in the middle of this big new generosity initiative that we're doing, Deeper, Wider. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we sort of had discovered prior, but we were reminded of, is that we kind of inadvertently killed a goose that was laying the golden egg, in our first 10 years. Do you want to talk about, kind of that process?
Yeah, this is a good bad example. So
exactly.
So early on, we had a very strong, what we would consider stewardship culture. And churches would ask me to come in and talk about how do you create a strong stewardship culture? And I'd go in there with all my great insight about stewardship culture. But the thing is, we were successful and we didn't do sort of an autopsy on our success. So we were experiencing great stewardship. People were generous, always had margin. You look at us go. And of course, you give God gratitude and thanks. But at the same time, we didn't ask the question, why? And we did 2 things to undermine our stewardship. One of the things is we didn't ask the question, what is the driving force? We just assumed if you preach about it every once in a while, people listen to these fabulous sermons and they just start giving money. Well, that was not the driving force, we discovered. And so as our stewardship culture began to flag, as we began to have less margin, as all of a sudden the conversations around income changed. Of course, our first thing was it's the economy, people don't attend as much, all those things. But when we were finally honest with ourselves, it was 2 things. One, when we started our church, we had a very strong ministry around the small group curriculum, Crown Financial. They called it Crown Financial Ministry. It was a small group study. And we actually had a staff member who drove Crown Ministries through our organization. You could not be here 3 or 4 weeks without hearing about Crown, people being invited into the Crown study where you learn that God owns everything, stewardship, all those kinds of things. Right. So that was so strong going in, and we got tired of it. Everybody had already done it. The curriculum was old and dated, and slowly we just let that begin to fade. And that was a huge mistake. That was a driver we had not recognized as a driver to our financial success. And then something else happened. Then we got super creative and decided, let's quit taking an offering. So the second thing we did is we took the one time in the service where you have to talk about money out of the worship service. And what do you think all the lead pastors did? Oh, good. We don't have to talk. We don't have to talk about money. Right. There's not a built-in time in the service. So we took away the training about stewardship, and we took about the weekly reminder about stewardship. And it never dawned on us what drivers those two things were to our culture of stewardship, because we had never asked the question, why is it working when it's working? We just assume, again, God's blessing, people are generous, the sermons are great, the curriculum are great. I mean, the environments are great. And if you minister to people, they'll just give. Well, as you know, and as we discovered, that is not the formula for a strong stewardship culture. So anyway, that's a failure story. So
yeah. And those will be great illustrations of some of the essentials that I guess we should start digging into right now. So as we begin to think through the idea of how to develop high performance teams, I know you've identified, I guess, what we call 4 key essentials. So let's just talk through those. And again, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. Duncan's going to sort of moderate that at the end. But Andy, let me just set you up. First essential.
Yeah. So, and again, this, me and many of you are the same way. Yeah, I got to have a list. If it's not memorable, it's not portable, then it's not doable. Right. So this was like, hey, what is, if we want, because my takeaway from walking the halls that day, as I got past just the details of our organization and the details of our programming, which I thought was great, was we have people who execute. I am surrounded by executors, not just thinkers and people with ideas. These are, anyway. So number one, first ingredient is performance oriented. You have to, let me put it this way, the 4 essentials. This is how I frame this. The 4 essentials of a high performance team. Number one, performance oriented people positioned for maximum impact. It's performance oriented people. In other words, people who execute and have them positioned in the organization for maximum impact. So that's kind of the first one.
Let's break that down into first of all, identifying performance-oriented people and then positioning them for a maximum impact. Talk about how we identify, you sort of alluded to it a little bit there, finding those executors.
Yeah. Well, this is not a popular thing to say, and I don't think I say it publicly too much anymore, but you have to have a majority of doers rather than thinkers. And this doesn't mean you're not hiring smart people. It just means certain people are more predisposed to taking action and taking initiative rather than, pontificating about good ideas and what we should do and could do, and then delegating their specific responsibilities. Some people are just less predisposed to execution than others, and you need people who are predisposed to execution, not delegation. And the truth is, and this is the part that sometimes people don't like, is I say it is much easier to educate a doer than to activate a thinker. It is much easier to educate a doer. In other words, if you have an action-oriented person, you can teach them your model and you can train them and, hey, this is what we're doing here and this is why we do it. It is much easier to educate a doer because they're chomping at the bits to do something than to activate a thinker, somebody it's a temperament thing. Their temperament is to consider and to think, and they got a little less get up and go. They're content not to have to do a lot of things. So you got to hire people who are wired to get things done and then educate and enculturate them into what you're doing as a church. And again, Holly is a great example of this. She is a get it done person who came into the organization as a person who was just drifted. She learned our model. And she was already a doer and an executor. She just, focused all that energy on, what we're doing here. And so one of the ways to help identify those people, and this was not my idea. I learned this from my assistant of 26 years now, or 7 years now, Diane Grant. Part of her career in the past was she did interviews for people in medical staffing. And so this is a question we ask people when we're interviewing, because you already know where they went to school. You already know where they used to work. You got a resume and all that stuff. You ask this question and you keep it short and you just let it hang. What have you done? Tell me something you've done. I know where you worked. I know what your job description. Tell me something you've done. And if they pause for too long, and they have a hard time coming up, or then you find you sense they're sort of manufacturing something they've accomplished. Chances are that that might be a pass, regardless of their education and regardless of how long they've, even been in ministry. If they haven't, I wrote in my notes, if they haven't done anything in the past, that may be a good indicator they're not going to do anything in your future. So, it's easier to activate a think. It's easier to educate a doer than activate a thinker. Sorry for the long answer. So
no, absolutely. And, Holly is such a great example, an incredibly bright woman, innovative thinker, but it's always attached to moving the ball down the field. It's always attached to getting something done. It's not, let's just get into the periphery, so it is not an exclusion of one or the other. So, you find incredibly good thinkers who get things done. So let's move on.
Here's the other problem in terms of specifically ministry. Seminary does not attract doers. Seminary attracts thinkers and people who want to be educated in theology. And I'm all for that. That's not a takeaway at all. But I remember a professor at DTS my first year, and Lane, you remember Robert Rome?
Oh, yeah.
There was Robert and me and one other person, and this seminary professor said to us, you guys are going to have a hard time finishing here. And as the conversation moved on, and I didn't have the language we're using today, this was many years ago, essentially, as I've never forgotten this conversation, essentially I think he was saying, you're in an environment of thinkers and theology geeks and people who probably should not go into church work. They should probably go into academia and be teachers. And you're not wired that way, and you may not finish. And I remember Robert and I talking about that, thinking, we're going to finish. Yeah. But when we bumped into that thing, because it was a 4-year master's degree. I mean, I look back on that, think I was crazy. But anyway, so the sort of the takeaway is you may find better people outside of theological education world to bring in and educate because they're doers and they know how to get things done because, we've been called to get things done. So anyway.
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time and money sending get it done people to seminary once we found them in the marketplace.
And in some cases, making them finish. I mean, you remember the story of Joel Thomas, who many of you are going to meet for the first time. He came to work for us. He hadn't finished school yet. And he said, I'm going to drop out of school. I don't need to finish school. I love what we're doing here. And we were about to hire him. I won't tell you who. And I intervened. I said, no, we're not hiring Joel. Yeah. Joel, you go back to school and you finish, and then we'll hire you, because I understood that tension, that dynamic. So anyway, we can keep moving.
No, that's great. All right. So the second part of that is position them for maximum impact. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, this is kind of the Jim Collins thing. You got to get people in the right seat on the bus. I wrote in my notes, the right person in the wrong place over time begins to feel like the wrong person. If you put the right person in the wrong place over time, you think it's the wrong person. And then I have this quote I love. It's attributed to Albert Einstein, but nobody knows for sure. But the quote is amazing. Here's what he supposedly said. Everybody, you may have heard this before, everybody is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its whole life believing that it's stupid. And we have made that mistake and almost lost some great people because we just put them in the wrong seat. So you get active people who do things, but you've got to place them for maximum impact. And I'll confess, this is something I'm not good at. This is something that Bill Willits is really good at. This is something that Joel is really good at. We have other staff members. Holly's really good at that. As soon as I put her over the whole staff at North Point Community Church, one of our first conversations, she said, Andy, I think we have some people in the wrong seat. I'm like, fix it. I have a tendency to play checkers. Every play piece is the same and they all move forward. But, as somebody brilliantly said years ago, when it comes to leadership, we have to play chess. Every single player on the board has a different move, and we have to position them for that move. And sometimes that takes a while. The younger they are, the longer it takes to figure that out. But the quicker we figure it out, and the quicker we clear some space for them to do what they do well, then they bring their greatest gift and their greatest energy to the organization. And when people have the freedom to bring their A game to an area where they're gifted, then your organization just gets better. And that's not always intuitive immediately. And odds are there's probably somebody that you're working with, maybe a volunteer or maybe you, that's really good at recognizing and strategically placing talent in the right spot. And your organization, I wrote, your organization is going to be at its best when team members are doing what they do best.
Right.
Lane would tell you, I should never be in charge of planning an event. Ever. If my job was event planning, I would feel like a failure every single day of my life. So again, this is important. And that, to some degree, you've all experienced that personally, I would guess.
Yeah. And for those of you with small staffs or maybe even no staff, the marketplace can be your friend here. I mean, there are people in your rows who do this for really, really good companies. Ask them to come in and help you assess. I mean, they know what you do and they know how to do this. This may be your, one of your best assets. So,
yeah.
Andy, I mean, I feel like that one step alone might keep everybody, on the call, including myself, as I think through what we have here, busy. But let's move on to the second essential. Yeah.
Yeah. So the second essential, and Lane and I tweaked this a little bit. So the second essential is to create, high performance teams. It is incumbent upon us as leaders to clarify three things: what, why, and where. What, why, and where. Everybody in your organization should be able to answer these three questions. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And where do I fit in? What are we doing as an organization? Why are we doing it? And where do I fit in? What, why, and where are really the fuel I wrote for high performance teams. Everybody on this call has a favorite sport and a favorite team within the context of that sport. And all of you have done athletic competition at some level. And the one thing that teams love to do is what?
Yeah, well, I'll answer. It's win. Everybody likes, So
yeah,
at least, I know I do.
If you have somebody on your staff that doesn't like to win, they need a job. They don't need a responsibility. Anyway, so we, what, why, and where. The what is the win. Everybody in every part of the organization, every team, every division, every department, there needs to be a win. This is why in Deeper, Wider, I think at the end of the book, I know in the original version, we listed the ministry wins. In other words, in preschool, what's the win? With children, what's the win? Middle school, high school, young adults, singles, what's the win? How do we know we did it? In spite of just attendance, how do we know what was the win? This is one of the reasons that we employed the 4 disciplines of execution strategy. Teams need some sort of active scoreboard connected to some sort of actionable execution strategy because we want to win. So if what is the win, then the why is the inspiration. Why are we doing this? I mean, you're telling me this is important. This is what we're doing. Why do we need to do it? Why is always the inspiration. I wrote that why informs the team as to why what they're doing matters. What's at stake? And here's the other question. What goes away if we go away? So what's at stake? Why is student ministry important? Why is your church and your community important? What's the distinctive? What does your community lose if your church goes away? That's the why. And the answer to that question is not as readily available as you think. That's something you need to think about. What is our contribution to what God's doing in our community that adds to what other churches in our community are doing? Let's assume God's blessing all the churches, all right? But in other words, what goes away? And at the personal level, when every individual on the team understands what goes away if they go away, now there's a sense of you've got a real team. I mean, again, think of your favorite sport. When my kids played baseball, nobody wanted to be the left fielder, but you got to have a left fielder, right? Nobody necessarily, wants to bat last, but you got to have a last batter, right? So whatever the sport is, and that's why the sports analogy is so important. It's immediately apparent when somebody doesn't do the specific assignment they're given. Right. But the same is true in organizational life. But the difference is the scoreboard isn't up in front of the congregation or on a stadium, and it's not a 2-hour or a 3-hour match or game, right? It's we don't know the score in some cases for weeks. So it's even more important for us to have here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it. And then again, the where did they fit in? And the where do they fit in defines their individual or essential contribution. In other words, it comes down to this. If I'm talking to Lane for a minute, Lane, gives leadership to all of our lead pastors. I would say, Lane, if you don't, it won't. Right. In other words, if you don't do the following, it won't happen. There's something in our organization, not the whole organization, but there's something in our organization that solely depends on you, or in a larger organization that solely depends on the people that are doing those specific jobs in the organization. And this is not an easy thing to clarify for everybody, but to the degree that everybody can answer the question, what are we doing? We answer that the same. Why are we doing it? We answer that the same. Where do I fit in? That's that individual responsibility. And again, it's a responsibility. It's not a job. It's a responsibility.
Yeah.
What, why, and where.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I do think the clarity that brings, is it goes back in some ways to the illustration we gave at the beginning, is the clarity of not only a person, but the clarity of an environment and understanding why it's there, what it's, the role it plays. And we do that, as you said, for preschool. And when you've identified those, then you do know what you build those walls around, what you protect, because you realize what's at stake if you don't protect it. That's great.
Yeah. With clarity around these things, for sure, it does a couple things, and you just said it, but the other thing related to that, it focuses energy and keeps us from sideways energy and superfluous, initiatives that are, because your staff and the people, your volunteers are like ours, like, hey, have you ever thought about? We're like, yes, and we're not doing that. Hey, have you considered? We have, or no, we haven't, and we're, everybody's got an idea, right? They don't want to make it happen. They just, have ideas. So this focuses energy and resources. And the other thing it does, this kind of focus, what, why, and where, it actually lays the groundwork for organizational change, because at the outset of any conversation about change should begin with, where do we want to be? Where do we want to go? People are far more likely to let go of what they're currently doing if they see letting go as a means to an end, a preferred future. And when your what is laser focused and your why is inspirational, people are more likely to actually change, rather than just say, oh, we want to change until something actually changes. So
yeah. And I've seen, and I think this is a huge benefit of this, the clearer that why is, it empowers people to say, I think I have a better way of doing that. I think, I know we've been doing this, but if you just have a program and the answer is, no, we just do that, not the why behind it, there's no way to improve it. There's no way for somebody to go, I think I have a better way. I think I have a better answer. So
that's a case of marrying the model. This is, we've married the model instead of the mission. And,
exactly.
And again, and the thing is, for all of you listening, and same for us, let's face it, we all inherited a church model. No matter, even if you started your own church from scratch, you brought some assumptions in. You brought the style of preaching in, a length of service. We have all inherited a model. And models come and models go. The clearer the vision, the easier it is to bring about changes to the church model that all of us, including me, we all inherited. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, Andy, that gets us to number 3, which I know you've said and we've experienced is really probably one of the tougher ones of these essentials. And it's organizing to the what, or, building your organization around what you just talked about.
This is hard. And if you came into an existing church and you're the new pastor or the new-ish pastor, this is very challenging. Or if you work within the context of a specific denomination that, we're going to get to this in just a minute, that this is the way we do it here, this is very challenging for you. It's more challenging for you than it was for me and for us. I will acknowledge that right up front. Because we started from scratch without any denominational ties. We had planned to be Southern Baptists. But the more I met with the Southern Baptist pastors in our community, the more I realized we have almost nothing in common with them. Why would we strap ourselves to that rocket? And anyway, so we didn't. So here's what it means to organize to the what. You may have heard me say this before. Organizations do what they are organized to do, not what the leader tells them to do. Organizations do what they're organized to do. So you get up and cast a vision about, all the stuff and the change and the direction we're going. And then when you're finished, your staff and your volunteers, they go back and do what they were doing before that vision cast, because they have a job description, they're trained, they're paid to do what what the organization has hired them to do. So if we don't organize to or reorganize to our what, then it just isn't ever going to happen. But this is difficult. So it means doing, an autopsy, or not an autopsy, but doing an evaluation a deep dive into what in our organization is streamlined toward our what, and what, again, is just eating up resources and dollars, or what is not working and can't be fixed. For example, let's take student ministry. Let's say you've got children's going okay, preschool's going okay, but your student ministry, you don't even want to put your own student in it. Or, your children are going to be in that student ministry in 2 years, and you're like, I think I'm going to send them to a different church. Because then instead of trying to fix it, you may have to just shut it down and just decide, we don't have student ministry. It has to go away so much that when you restart it, you're not editing and fixing something, right. You're launching something. Anything new has its own momentum. There is an advantage to shutting something down, clearing the decks, taking the heat, answering the hard questions. A relaunch with some space will create its own momentum. Yeah. And so again, if that's what it takes to get your organization to be organized around what it's designed to do, and this is why up front, what Lane said, of these four, this is the most difficult one, because it does require change. It's not fun. But organizations don't do what's written on the walls. Organizations don't behave according to the written values. They do what they're organized to do. So we have to create an organization where the lion's share of time and resources are allocated to our what. And if you don't, and this is some of your story, it's why you're doing what you do now rather than what you used to do. Otherwise, we force our high performers to work around the organization, because the organization is no longer working for them. And your high performers are only going to stay in that environment for so long. And if you've ever worked in an organization where you felt like, in order to accomplish the mission of the organization, I have to work around the organization of the organization. I mean, Lane and I, we did that, and we were done with that. And we don't want anyone in our organization to ever feel that way, that the organization isn't supporting our mission and what we hired them to do. So anyway.
Yeah, that's great. And as you said, incredibly difficult, but probably if there can be an essential, it's the essential one, because the other three,
they're not going to work.
No, they're not going to work without doing that. In fact, it's going to make things worse, because as you said, people are going to get hopeful, then they're going to get frustrated, and then you're actually deeper in a hole than you were. Well, when
that's one of the advantages of the Irresistible Church Network. You're going to be with like-minded people who are more mission-driven than model-driven. Right. And just as a side, when you hear us talk about things that are model-oriented, those aren't written in stone for us, and they shouldn't be adopted by you if anything in our model conflicts with what you're trying to do at your church, or it conflicts with something in your church, not your church culture, but if something that conflicts in your broader culture, that's like, oh, that's not going to get us there. So I hope we're good at distinguishing those things.
Yeah, which is one of the fascinating things, that when I'm with you guys and I go into the further, faster churches, I see that, and you guys are really embracing, the idea of contextualizing these things. And we, at the same time, can then learn from your expression of it. So that's the great thing about the network is, we learn from each other. We learn by seeing what other people are doing. So that's amazing.
Yeah. Quick example right now, our middle school directors from all of our Atlanta area churches are in Texas visiting churches, talking to them about how they do middle school. I think we probably have the largest middle school ministry in the country. but we still have stuff to learn. So they're going to
Absolutely.
churches with fewer, quote, middle schoolers to find out, but they've heard here's some churches that are doing some innovative thing for middle school and high school. Hey, we got to keep learning,
Exactly.
growing organizations are learning organizations, and leaders have to continue to be learning, or, the hourglass is running out of sand and the fuse has been lit, and,
Right.
we're not moving in the right direction. So
Yeah.
anyway,
And
you want
that,
to do the fourth one?
yeah, that absolutely
Yeah.
sets us
Yeah.
up for the first one because it is that process. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
the fourth one. Yep. Yep. So the fourth essential for creating high performance teams is orchestrate and evaluate everything. Orchestrate and evaluate everything, something we talk a lot about. Orchestrate, we took this word from Michael Gerber's book, the E-Myth or the E-Myth Revisited. You may have read that book. So to orchestrate, I'll just read this. To orchestrate answers the question, this is how we do it here until further notified. This is how we do it here until further notified. Orchestration creates predictability. It's why you love your favorite restaurant. It's why when you talk to your friends about your favorite restaurant, you are confident they're going to experience what you experience because there's predictability built in. And Michael Gerber, he defines it this way. He says, orchestration is the elimination of discretion or choice at the operating level of your business. That orchestration is eliminating discretion. In other words, our volunteers, our parking team doesn't get to show up Sunday and decide they're going to do it differently. Now, we're going to evaluate on Monday, but they don't get to decide on Sunday. Hey, we're kind of tired of everybody moving in that direction. Let's put the cone somewhere else, okay? No, we have orchestrated our parking lot and our parking processes. So orchestration is the elimination of discretion. It's the playbook. It brings consistency and, as I said, predictability to all of your environments. And when it's done correctly, and this is the explodes a myth or bust a myth. When orchestration is done well, your organization, your church will feel more personal, not less personal.
Yeah.
When you think about the organizations, the online places you shop, it feels so personal. It is 100% orchestrated.
Right.
There's nobody on the other end that is looking at what you. In other words, it is so orchestrated, it's automated, and it feels personal. So the idea that if we orchestrate everything, we're just gonna be a church that's impersonal, that is not the case at all, because
Right.
it's not just orchestration, it's also evaluation.
Yeah. And this applies, to the worship service. I mean, we have an orchestrated model and approach to doing and I think that's where, you'll see people want to be creative and want to throw something in and, switch things up. And yet, doing that, as you said, it makes it less predictable, less what people are expecting and what they've invited their friends to. So this isn't just the people moving systems or the how do you check people in system. This has a definite our application to the creative spaces and to the teaching spaces as well.
Yeah, orchestration says, here's how big your canvas is.
Right.
You can paint anything on there you want, but this is how big it is. Orchestration says our service is an hour and 5 minutes. But it's not just orchestration, it's also evaluation. So let me talk about that. One way to differentiate between the two is this statement. Orchestration defines your culture. Evaluation refines your culture. Right. So orchestration defines it. You need to go to North Point Community Church. Here's what you're going to experience. But if you don't evaluate, then you stagnate, right? Not everything I say rhymes. Sandra thinks it does. Anyway, so orchestration defines your culture. Evaluation refines your culture. Evaluation is how you make things better, more efficient, and less complex. And you know this, if you've been part of this network for any amount of time, we evaluate everything. We evaluate between services. My sermons are not off limits. What I wear is not off limits. My illustrations are not off limits. As I think you probably know, I prepare messages way ahead of time. My Easter sermon has been in the bucket for people to look at for over a month. My sermon after Easter, they've had for weeks, because especially if you're trying to do some creativity around a message. So all the lead pastors get my outline weeks ahead. The administrative assistants get it weeks ahead. The woman who does my slides, Darcy, some of you've met Darcy, she knows, don't hold back, because what
Right.
we're doing corporately is more important than what I want to say on a Sunday. And as a leader, I'm telling you, if you will model that kind of transparency and learn to swallow your pride and go somewhere else and vent your frustration. What do they know about preaching? What do they know about leading a church? They don't know as much as you do, but they're going to help you be better if you'll learn to listen to people who cannot perform at your level or who have no skill in terms of what your skill set is. So the pride that says, well, God showed me this is what I'm supposed to say. You can do that if you want to, but you're going to, you're going to pay for that because we are a body and you're just a toe, or maybe you're the mouthpiece or you're the head, but there's a neck turning the head. You get all that. You preach all that. So the evaluation, to the degree that we can model transparent, I'm not off the table evaluation, that trickles down throughout the whole organization to the point of when there's a staff member, and every once in a while we bump into this, who is too insecure to be evaluated, they cannot stay in an important role because everything gets evaluated. It is okay to hurt. It is okay to hurt one person's feelings. It is not okay to hurt your entire congregation's feelings. It's okay to offend the one singer. It is not okay to offend the whole church with their singing. I'll stop there. But if you got to model that, and when you model that, it will help shape your culture.
Yeah. Well, Andy, why don't you just briefly tick through the 4 essentials, and then we'll turn it over to Duncan for a little Q&A.
Yeah. Select performance-oriented people and position them for maximum impact. Clarify the what, why, and where. Organize to your what, and then orchestrate and evaluate everything. And if you're going to orchestrate, you got to evaluate. If you just orchestrate, you're going to marry the model. Wake up one day and your model's going to be antiquated, and you'll wonder what happened. You'll wonder why isn't God blessing? And God's going to be like, because you weren't paying attention. All right. Thank you.
Absolutely. Duncan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wow. Honestly, you guys are good at this. This is rich. So
We've been practicing.
No, but you see, the thing that sparks me at the end of something like that is it's just so rich. And I just want you to know, from all the pastors that are on this call, we are so grateful that you don't just have a national vision, but you have an international. You're not just local, but you're global. Because we would be poorer without the kind of input that you give to us and to our network and to the pastors in Ireland and the UK. So thank you for thinking bigger than just the United States. We really appreciate that. And the content's great. So we've got maybe 10, 15 minutes to rattle through some quick fire stuff. Tim asks this question: Andy, any tips for practically discerning and diagnosing which of our organizational structures and strategies are not organized to the what? So people want to get a bit more granular. Any diagnosing and discerning which of our organizational structures and strategies are not organized to the what?
An incomplete answer, since I haven't had time to think about that question, but that's a great question. Wherever, so you may have heard us talk about this before. It's important to differentiate between problems to solve and tensions to manage. A problem that's solved is there's a fix and we don't have to talk about that anymore. A tension to manage is something that sits there all the time. It just keeps coming up and coming up and coming up. And if you try to solve a tension, you create a problem. Work and family life balance, you don't solve that. You manage that. So to answer the question, pay attention to the things that keep coming up over and over and over, because sometimes they're tensions to manage, but sometimes it's sideways energy that the important things keep bumping up against, whether it's budget dollars, whether it's overstaffed, understaffed, not correctly volunteered, any area that continues to just be, why are we talking about this again? And to ask the question, is this so important that it's a tension we must just keep front and center manage? Or is this a problem that continues to be a problem because the solutions don't seem to make it go away and it's diverting our attention, those kinds of things. So that's one thing. But honestly, as the leaders in the organization, I've not met all of you, but I'm confident if you'll just take this idea of we have to organize to the what, and
Right.
just look at all of your programming, look at your budget. Where is most of the money going to? If a small percentage of money is going to what's most important, that's a red flag. So look at your staffing model, your budget, and then again, again, I think once you bring the question, are we organized to our what? It becomes it becomes uncomfortably apparent what isn't essential. And it's hard because in most cases you're dealing with people or you're dealing with volunteers, people who've committed to the organization. And essentially what you're saying to them is this isn't essential. It's good. I mean, you haven't done anything wrong. In fact, I mean, you're doing good work, but it is not essential to what we're doing. And that's challenging, especially if you inherited a model where that has always been a part of that church. And suddenly it's like, it's just not essential. Those are the tough leadership decisions. You can do it.
That's great. Thank you. Just getting really granular here, Andy. Let me read you Rachel's question. I lead a church, she says, of around 100 adults over 2 sites. She says, I'm part-time.
Wow.
We have no other staff. The church is in a low socioeconomic area, so no chance of affording staff. Got a lot of helpful people, but very few leaders. So she's asking, what would be the one thing that you would do to move forward in that situation?
Okay. First of all, I have no experience in that environment. So it's okay to roll your eyes and talk bad about me later after I give you my answer. Okay. I'm serious. So it's Rachel, right?
Yeah.
Rachel, I think what I would say is you know what you do best. And to the degree that you can focus the lion's share of your time and energy on what you do best and allow that to become the reputation of your church. That is not a negative thing. That's not about you being self-centered. That's your best opportunity to bring your strength to the point where that becomes the strength of your local church. And to feel comfortable allowing things that aren't your strength to go unaddressed and to be able to look at people and say, I'm sorry, we don't do that here, or we don't have that here. Because you, as you already know, you need critical mass in order to create the help you need to add those things. So the less you do personally, the less things you do personally, the more you will be able to accomplish, because you're not all that good at a whole lot of things unless God has extraordinarily gifted you and you're great at everything. But even if you're great at everything, you don't have time to do everything. So be comfortable saying, this is what our church does. This is who our church is. And it is okay for your church to reflect your strengths. And over time, if you're able to increase the congregation, your church will not reflect your weaknesses. But if you continue or feel the pressure to do everything, it'll never reflect your strengths, and it will reflect your weaknesses. That's very general. That's not very granular. But I think that's your best bet. And as you know, Rachel, you are energized when you are in your zone, and you are exhausted when you're not, because that's true of all of us. So again, feel free to, yeah, sure, Andy, thanks, but no thanks. And Duncan, you should help answer that question. You probably understand her context way better than I do.
Yeah, sure. But I'm the one asking the questions, though. So
Yeah.
no, and I'd be really happy.
Well, Rachel said thank you, so she doesn't feel completely insulted. So
no, that's great.
That's such an important
Yeah.
such an important question. And I am more sensitive to this than you might think, that in certain regions of a city or even neighborhoods where you have skilled workers who've never carried responsibility beyond I show up, I clock in, I do my job, I go home. I don't even think about my job till I clock in the next day. That's a very different mindset than what we're talking about in terms of people to lead. And also, it often impacts, and we've run into this, it also impacts those church attenders' ability to facilitate a conversation in a small group or to even lead a discussion, it's just something they don't have experience in because of the nature of the jobs they do. So all of that has to, and Rachel, I'm sure you've done this, so ignore this. It has to obviously impact your programming and how you do what you do. So this is an illustration of why you should probably ignore everything we have to offer in terms of the model, because you are working within a different model. And again, you got your mission, you create the model. And if it may be something other churches need to model by, again, organizing around their what, as opposed to trying to be all things to all people, because that's impossible.
Thank you. A couple more questions, quick fire questions. There's a few questions, Andy, around Jim Collins's idea of the right people in the right seats on the bus. Give us some granular help. There's Andy here is asking you, Andy. There's one guy in particular that he's thinking of. How do you, when you have someone who's been in the right seat on the bus, but now the church has grown, the opportunity is different. How do you actually get them out of that seat and move them along? How do you navigate that tough conversation?
Lane was part of one of those with one of our original six staff members. The organization and this person's responsibility, it just outgrew them. They just could not keep up. It was terrible. But you sacrifice, that's a strong word. You sacrifice the one for the many, never the many for the one. And it was personal, somebody that we both knew long before we started the church, and they just couldn't keep up. And it was terrible. If it's not terrible and it's not hard, it's because you don't care. The reason it's so hard and the reason it's dreadful is because you care, and it's what you do. And because you care, you will have the ability, probably if they're mature, to patch the relational side up, even though they're not going to be in the organization or in the organization at that level. And what you may discover, to your relief, is that when it's all said and done, they feel relieved as well. Because if you sense they can't keep up, they also sense they can't keep up, but they don't know what to do. And nobody wants to drop back into organization. So you're probably doing them a favor, even though it feels like you're stabbing them in the back. But you've got to make that decision. Otherwise, they will sense that you are working around them and you are accommodating them, and that is not honoring. Honesty is honoring. The workaround is dishonoring. So you just have to do it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
It's not great. It's terrible. But yeah, thank you.
It's a great
It's
answer.
the worst. Oh,
Yeah.
It's the worst.
Yeah. But that's really helpful, Andy. It's really helpful because I think we go into it presuming that we can navigate this and we'll hug afterwards and everything's going to be great. And
No.
never.
Well, I tell you what's even worse in all of our organizations is when you have to move a volunteer out, because essentially you're saying your free time and energy isn't worth it to us. I mean, what a horrible thing that's what they feel. It's like, wait, I'm giving you my time and energy. And they're like, yes, we would be better off in this department if you would not give us your time and energy. I mean, ugh. I mean, so really quick story. Okay. Lane was there for this. When I became the youth pastor at my dad's church, I inherited a Sunday school model, and half the Sunday school teachers were terrible. They didn't know their kids' names. They weren't consistent. Lane's laughing. So this is what I did. One Sunday, I gave all the kids an evaluation sheet to evaluate their Sunday school teacher.
No, really?
Yes, because I knew they were terrible, and the kids filled them out. And the next 2 weeks, 2 Wednesdays later, we had a meeting, and I said, you better show up because I'm bringing your results. There were tears. Teachers quit. The right teachers quit because some kids wrote, I don't know my teacher's name, which means I never get contacted. I never get followed up. My guy, and I told him, I said, if you don't know your teacher's name, okay, I was young and stupid, okay? I said, just write a description so we'll know who your leader is. Oh my gosh. It was terrible. But the point is, my responsibility was the spiritual development of middle school and high school students,
Right.
not babysitting a bunch of adults who've been teaching Sunday school there forever and loved having their coffee and donuts and just didn't care about kids. So anyway,
Yeah.
there was weeping and gnashing of teeth, and there was one woman in particular who wanted to quit. And I pulled her aside afterwards and I said, "No, you can't quit. You can do this. You have it in you to do this. You just," and she's like, and she did. She jumped back in, served for years in that capacity. It was just a wake up call. So
Yeah.
I don't recommend that. That's just you know, young and dumb. It worked.
Yeah. The stakes,
And I was the pastor's kid, so it was going to be hard to fire me. So anyway,
but the stakes are too high just to brush it under the carpet.
yeah, they're way high. Yeah.
So, just two more real quick questions. You picked up on volunteers there, Andy. There's quite a few. Chris is asking, Judith is asking questions around how do you hold volunteers accountable, which is kind of what you've just lent into. And how do you motivate them and inspire them? Because many of our pastors, many of our churches don't have big staff teams, if any staff
Right.
team, like Rachel. It's all volunteer based. So how do you motivate them and inspiring? How do you hold them accountable?
Well, this goes back to everything we just said. The clearer the what,
Yes.
the easier it is to hold someone accountable. If the what isn't clear, they may think they're winning and you think they're losing and they're playing a different game. And they're going to be shocked. So what is a step toward accountability? Why is the inspiration part? And if your volunteers, this is why we have the parking team meets in the morning before they go out to just, hey, here's what's critical today. Today, a single mom is going to drive up in this parking lot. It is so big and intimidating. And if we aren't there for her, she's going to turn around and drive off. And her child is not going to have the opportunity to grow up in these environments. That's what's at stake. You are not parking cars. Everybody who pulls into this parking lot already knows how to park their car. They do it everywhere. They don't have parking attendants at Walmart and all these retailers. You're not there to help them find a parking spot. You are there to ensure they have a good experience. That's what's at stake. Yeah. So the degree to which every volunteer team can answer the question, why are we doing this? And what is my specific role? And y'all are all leaders. You can create energy around the why. And if they don't have that energy, they're just going to be doing this because their friends are there, or they're just not going to show up. So that's part of it. Clarity around what, inspiration around why, and then just that constant communication and gratitude. Gratitude goes a long, long way. And so that's sort of the short answer to that. Very, very important question.
But I love this idea of gratitude. I remember talking to Jeff Henderson a while ago, and he talked about when he was at one of the lead pastors in your church. He talked about every day he would write 2 or 3 personal thank you cards.
Yeah.
And, just imagine there's one thing to get a text from someone. There's one thing for someone to tap you on the shoulder on Sunday and say, hey, you did a great job there. That means a lot. But when you actually get a handwritten note, especially from the pastor that says, I notice what you've done, it's making a huge difference and we're really grateful. That's massive. That's massive. So thank you.
So when Diane, my assistant, gets an email from people outside the organization or someone inside the organization bragging on someone, even if it didn't come to me, she takes it, she highlights the person's name, she hands it to me, and I write a note, just a short note on the bottom of the email, and we mail it to them to say, somebody bragged about you, it came to my attention, thank you for helping us win, thank you for making us better. I try to attach it to one of our 6 staff behaviors. Thanks for taking it personally. You were noticed. It's a big deal. I don't do handwritten notes because I can't even read my writing in an hour. So, but a handwritten note is way better than a text or even a typed note. And sometimes I'm like, pardon the formality of a typed note. No one can read my handwriting, but yes, it's, and I don't know if I know it's years ago. I interviewed Frank Blake from Home Depot, and I asked him, Frank, 30 or 300,000. I don't know how many, people in Home Depot internationally. I'm like, how did you turn the company around? He said, I started writing handwritten notes to people on the floors because the critical issue at a Home Depot, and every church has their own critical issue. Critical issue at Home Depot is what happens between the guy with the orange vest or the woman with the orange vest and the customer. He said, so I had to get to that level in the organization, and I can't walk the floors of all the Home Depots. So he began writing handwritten notes in response to any customer email or communication that said somebody did a good job. And he put enough in the note to recognize what they did. And he said at times he wrote 200 a week, handwritten notes. And then when he would go to Home Depots and walk the floors anywhere in the country, he said people would walk up with those handwritten notes and want him to sign them again or thank him. And then he had a really funny story about one woman whose husband said, a machine did that. And he proved it to me by putting it in water. He said, because the ink will run if it's real. And sure enough, the ink ran and ruined the note. And she brought that ruined note to him and asked if he would rewrite it on the back. So that's the power of that specific gratitude. So, and we're all too busy to do that. And we're all too, in our churches, are too important for us not to do that. So anyway.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Listen, guys, thank you. I need to let you get on because you've got days to carry on with. So thank you.
It's Easter. Easter's coming.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. What's your win for Easter services?
That the technology works.
Oh, I can't wait to watch that one.
I mean, Micah Stevens, who does all our technical stuff, he says, we may not be the biggest church in America. We are certainly the most complicated. And so, yeah, but, Easter's, it's the one shot for some people in the year, and we want to get it right. So
I was talking to one of our pastors, and I asked them that same question, what's your win for your Easter services? And they said to me, we decided that as a staff team that we would have a clear win, and it was that our people would invite their friends. And so once we clarified that was the win, we made sure we had all the resources we needed to give to our people.
Yep.
So that great, not little video clips that said, come to church at Easter, it's going to be great.
Yep.
But video clips that said, have you ever wondered what happens 5 seconds after you die? You come to church on Easter, you'll find out. They're just intriguing stuff. That
I think that would make me not go to that church.
There's something in our culture. I think off the back of COVID, there's something in our culture.
Wait, are you telling me if I come to your church, I'm going to die? Is that what you're saying?
I probably said it in
an
unhelpful way.
Come to our church and find out.
Exactly. Yeah. Come and listen to our choir. But they decided what their win was and helped their people. So you talked about earlier on, this idea of absolutely clarifying your win for different events can be the difference maker. So there's so many golden pieces here. We've recorded it. Everybody who's on this call will get a link. So we'll tidy it up so that you can get a copy of this. We really appreciate the inspiration you're leaving with us. It's so helpful.